10 months ago I did a video showing how I replaced the drain pump and door seal on this 11-year-old dishwasher. A few months back the drain pump switch overheated and I replaced that, but chose at that point not to do a video on it. It's just failed again, so today I'm going to do a video on that replacement, but I'm also going to pose a big question to you. Just when is a machine too old to repair? So, the problem when I last replaced that switch was I didn't think to check at the time why that switch had failed, or in fact whether it had failed at all. I simply replaced it and put the machine back together. Now that switch activates for one of two reasons. When water in the bottom of the machine rises to a certain height, the float is raised, automatically triggering the switch and therefore the drain pump. However, there's also a polystyrene float that sits on the tray underneath the machine. If anything is leaking in the machine, chances are water will end up pooling on the tray, and bingo, the float rises and triggers the pump. There's no drain on the tray, so the pump doesn't actually remove that water. The problem is that when the switch fails, it stays on when the float returns to the empty position. And that's when you know you've got a problem, because the dishwasher stops working. And leaks under the machine I certainly had, two in fact. I identified these by jacking the machine up on wooden blocks and watching it during a short cycle. One leak came from the housing on the side of the machine. I think this is called the water inlet that circulates water around the machine, and the other from the seal that connects the circulation pump to the dishwasher sump. You can see how much water was in the tray when I tipped up the machine here, and also by the deposits left on the tray. I didn't focus on this in my last video, but you can just see some early evidence of leaking here. And at this point I started to question whether it was worth repairing the machine yet again, particularly given the leak on this O-ring was going to be difficult to fix. And whilst I thought about this, I found a website that runs through when to replace your machine, and it's quite helpful because they outline 5 steps to consider. When the control board is no longer responding, when the spray arms are no longer turning, if the machine is consistently not washing dishes well, despite the detergent, rinse aid all being correct and the salt properly topped up. If the dishwasher regularly dies or stops working mid-cycle. If the machine is more than 10 years old. And finally, if the cost of repairs exceeds 50% of the cost of a new dishwasher. My machine is now 11 years old, and taking into account costs incurred to date, including those 2 new switches, I'm on £167 for repairs so far. And if I spent £46 on a new upper door seal, which is getting close to the end of its working life, we'll be running at £213. Very close to the 50% threshold, because whilst I can't remember what I paid for the machine, it was somewhere in the region of £450 to £500. You could also argue that the water inlet, which is the source of one of those leaks, is partly clogged up and could do with either flushing out or replacing. We'd need to add another £32 to the list for this item. I spent nearly half of the cost of the machine already on replacement parts, and I have no means of knowing whether the next part that's going to fail is going to be terminal, like for example a control board. But anyway, I decided to order a new switch and hose seal, and I came up with a plan for the leaking connector on the water inlet. And for full details on how to remove your integrated appliance, check out my previous video, a link to which is coming up on screen now. Suffice to say, once you've isolated the mains water feed and disconnected the electrics, it's actually quite straightforward to remove your integrated dishwasher. And if you've removed it as many times as I have, I think it's 4 to date, it actually becomes very simple. For the drain pump or float switch, you need to remove a screw that attaches the switch housing to the base of the machine. You then need to disengage the float itself from the microswitch lever, after which you can then remove the float switch housing, and should you need to replace it, the entire float can at this point be removed from inside the machine. Stupidly, I never thought to check the switch was actually burnt out after removing the polystyrene float. You can certainly see evidence of overheating on this terminal for the original switch and also for the first replacement. So maybe check yours before ordering a new switch by running it on a cycle with the polystyrene float removed and the machine on blocks. The new switch is then simply slotted in place of the old, and the assembly can then be screwed back in place and the microswitch lever restored to the housing. I fixed the leak in the water inlet housing by piping CT1 around the entire connector. I chose CT1 because it can be used on wet surfaces and adheres to pretty much any material. And I used this Kramer rotating silicone nozzle to get behind the connector, diverting or funneling the sealant into the connector with my finger. The circulation pump hose seal was a very straightforward replacement. There are two rubber straps holding it to the body of the machine that are a bit of an effort to remove, but with that done, the circulation pump was free enough to be slipped out of the seal, and then the seal could be removed, with the replacement having arrived from eSpares. And actually, when you compare how easily the pump slipped out of the old seal compared with what a tight fit it was in the new one, it was actually really hard to get in. I felt justified in replacing this part. And then it was time to run the dishwasher on a full 1.5 hour cycle, and because I usually put it on a quick 30-minute wash, this being more than adequate for cleaning most of our stuff, to check out for leaks, and I'm glad to say there were none. And that's it, the machine is now fixed, possibly for another 6 months, perhaps more, perhaps less, I just don't know. Was the repair worth doing? Well, I think it was this time round. Let's face it, any repair that saves an appliance from landfill seems like a minor victory, and call me a bit sad, but I always feel a bit epic when I breathe new life into a machine that I thought had it. I think though it'll probably be the last repair I ever carry out to this machine, just because of the amount of money I've spent on it so far. So if you've got a drain pump which is currently playing up, hopefully I've given you a little bit of an insight into what might be causing it. And also a few things to think about if you are also wondering whether it's worth fixing your dishwasher this time round. I'll link to the replacement parts I've used in this video in the description below the video, which, don't forget, you can access on your smartphone by clicking on the little arrow, and on your PC by clicking on the Show More button. If you've liked this video, it'd be great if you could give it a thumbs up below. And if you're new to my channel, as I always say, it would be fantastic to have you subscribe. It would mean so much to me. And you can do that by clicking on the link here. But don't forget to click the bell notification icon so you get notified of all my future uploads. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.